Date with a Debut is a Words and Nerds and Breathe Art Podcasts co-production recorded on a Wagnical country. And I pay my respects to all elders, past and present, and extend that to any First Nations people tuning in. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. On with the show. Welcome to Date with a Debut, a podcast about debut authors, their incredible books, and their journey to publication. If you are looking for a new author to discover or writing inspiration for your own story and you don't know where to start, this is the place to be. I'm Nick Wasiliev, author of When Men Cry and your host for today's show, and I'm delighted to welcome another debut author in today's episode. If you enjoy the show, or indeed any other shows on the Words and Nerds platform, jump online and give us a thumbs up, a 5-star review, wherever you are listening. Thank you for listening to us and for supporting the Australian book industry. You can also find any books mentioned in today's podcast down in the description. In today's episode, I'm joined by Carly-Jay Metcalfe, a Queensland writer whose work has been published in Kill Your Darlings, The Guardian, and Text Journal. However, we are here today to talk about her debut memoir, Breath, published by University of Queensland Press, which catalogues her journey and her battles with cystic fibrosis, surviving a double lung transplant, opioid addiction, and overcoming cancer at the age of 30. I started off by asking Carly about pulling from memories to craft such a raw and intimate book, and the experience of translating that to the page. Before we begin this podcast, this episode does discuss topics of surgery, death, and addiction, so reader and listener discretion is advised. So normally I kind of like to start these podcasts with talking to the author about, how the journey, everything like that. But I mean, you cover it pretty damn well in this book, and I'm almost compelled to start. The question that first came to me was felt compelled to start with this book was with at the end, because the journey you take us on, you kind of bring it home in the acknowledgements, which did make me cry a few times.
Sorry.
No, don't apologise.
I actually made the typesetter cry.
Oh.
I know, and I was like, oh my goodness, I felt awful. And then I thought, well, that's a very visceral response, which I guess is good.
Yeah. I'm not surprised to hear that. It's because it's honest. It's a very honest book and a very honest reaction. But you mentioned in those acknowledgements that you kind of began writing this book in 2018. You were pulling on strands and shards of memory and trying to craft together a timeline of what the hell has happened to you. Because this is just been your life. This whole situation has just been your life. How did it feel transcribing it on the page?
Oh my goodness, where do I start? It certainly wasn't cathartic or liberating. I'd spoken to one of my writing buddies, Chris Olsen. She was actually the first person I ever showed my word vomit of a manuscript to back in, I think it was 2019. And she said, have you found it cathartic? Because she's written a memoir. I said, no, it's been fucking awful. And she said, oh my God, thank you so much for saying that, because you hear about writers who say, oh, it was so cathartic getting everything down on the page. It was really quite a brutal, act, committing my thoughts and stories to the page.
Well, I'm not surprised to hear that, in all honesty. I think the whole cathartic thing, it kind of works two ways. If anyone believes that your first draft is a cathartic experience, they're kidding themselves. It's a nightmare. You're splodging onto a page and you have no confidence in it in any way, shape or form. And I can only imagine it would have been difficult afterwards. And maybe the catharticness comes from being separate from it after a while and having some time to process it. And I will definitely say we were talking about this before we started recording, but the reactions of people. You even mentioned you made the typesetter cry putting this book. Like people are looking at this and going, "Holy shit!" And you're just like, "Well, yeah, this is just my life."
Yeah.
There is something in that.
I think I've never considered. I'm not special. I'm really not. I suppose I've just got a very unique experience of life that not many people do. So for me, it's all just, writing about this kind of stuff is very natural. As hard as it was to get down, it's always been, I guess, a natural part of the process. And I mean, I actually started writing this book when I was 11. So, and sadly, I actually had enough for a memoir when I was 11, which does make me a bit sad. But yeah, it was 2018 when I decided to get serious about it after being kind of hassled into it by various people. I thought, oh yeah, okay, I should really do something. So, but the response has been nothing short of incredible. I find it quite surprising that people genuinely love my book, and I think that's just imposter syndrome, which I think a lot of us suffer from.
It's the reality. Like at some point when you're an author, you're often like, did I do that? Because this book then goes off and has a life of its own, and it feels like, did I do that? Is that me? No, but yes, it is. It is absolutely you. With that kind of said, let's dive into it. Let's talk about breathe. Breath, breathe, breath. Sorry, I don't know why I had to double take so many times.
Yeah, no, it's easy to. So many people have said, "Oh, great book, breathe." I'm like, yeah, okay, and then they go, "Hang on, no, it's breath."
Breath. So we always start before when we're diving into the book, giving yourself a 1-minute pitch, which I feel like is really hard to do with this particular book.
Okay.
But what is breath about?
Okay, breath is a memoir about illness. This is going to sound really depressing. Illness, death, dying, grief, medicine, being a woman in a sick body, survivor's guilt, and, well, so much more, really. So having been born with the terminal illness, cystic fibrosis, at the age of 21, I had a double lung transplant I had days to live, so I was incredibly lucky. And when I was 30, I was diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer. And I had seizures, and doctors weren't sure whether I had sustained brain damage or not. And I guess it's a story of how I recovered from both surgeries, how I've wrestled with drug addiction, survivor's guilt about my seer friends not having made it. And it's not trauma memoir, it's not medical memoir, it's not grief memoir. I think it's a bit of a unique exploration around illness and survival.
Great way to describe it. Nailed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, couldn't have nailed it any better. And for kind of everyone listening, I feel like you really nail. Often everyone says that the first line or the first paragraph is really what should set the stage for what the book is about. And I'm going to read the first two sentences.
Please do.
It absolutely does. I am dying. I know that I'm dying, despite not having been told by my doctors that I am dying. I know I am dying because I'm in the dying room. What I love about this book is that you bring us right into the world of being ill, which smashes any preconceptions that anyone may have on being on the outside of it, looking in and trying to apply their own meaning to it. How you approach people who are ill. And again, I know we were going back to the end of the book. I feel like we can talk about spoilers in a little bit more detail.
Well, I mean, everyone knows how it ends. I lived.
Yes, exactly. I mean, Surprise.
No surprises there. I know.
The actual journey itself in the book, I will keep up to the reader, but there is a very beautiful, the last chapter, that one page, the conversation with your dad,
Oh, goodness.
is brought it really back home, where he calls you, he's sick, and he stops to ask you, how do you do it? And you just respond, well, it's always been there. I've just dealt with it like that. And the question, I know we kind of talked about reactions a little bit more, but seeing that as this is your life, this is your normal, this is the things that you have experienced, I get the feeling that probably the reactions to this book have surprised you, or maybe made you take pause.
Yeah, they have, and I think what has surprised and almost overwhelmed me is the kindness and compassion that people have shown towards both me and the book. And people are saying, oh, why are you so surprised? But I legitimately am. And I really think that gets down to imposter syndrome. Yeah. You
navigate many things that I think a lot of people, where the surprise is for me, is that you're navigating things that a lot of people just haven't really had the chance to understand, because a lot of people have lived without these sort of complications. You navigate disease, the section about where you talk about the actual lung transplant. You really hit us with no BS, which I just love how unflinchingly honest it is, particularly when you talk about the donor.
Yes.
And how her family donated everything. And small disclaimer for anyone listening, by the way, if you aren't down on the donor list to donate, please do, and I will include links in the description to that, by the way.
Thank you so much for saying that.
But I really loved the little stories peppered throughout this book as well. The people you fell in love with,
Yes.
the friends and the people that you met in that setting. And it reminded me, we were talking about it again. It's often people can bring their own experience to it, but in my own experiences with being in hospital with family and friends, people often view it in a negative way, but in truth, it's an incredible space filled with moments of privilege and beauty in the saddest of, or most toughest of circumstances. Yeah. And I first of all want to highlight just how well you capture that in this book.
Thank you. That really means a lot. So thank you.
What was it like? I kind of saw, because I get a sense that you're very appreciative of that entire profession in the medical space. Talk to me about that.
Oh my goodness, doctors, nurses, physios. I think I thanked everyone in my acknowledgements, including orderlies, blood ladies, that kind of thing. They're my heroes, really. So I think I have such a rich sense of respect and admiration for what they do, because it's not easy. The stuff that they see on a daily basis, the suffering that they see on a daily basis, is, it's a lot. And I don't know personally how they decompress from that. I do know that, it does come down to being both compassionate and also being a critical thinker, because that's how you save lives. So, you don't save lives by pussyfooting around. It's very much thinking on your feet, critical thinking. And so, at the beginning of this year, actually, I got COVID for the first time, which is amazing that I've dodged it for 4 years. But I went from having a scratchy throat one day to being in a resuscitation bay in emergency the next, in septic shock. So, and I wasn't scared at any point, because I knew I was in the right place. I was surrounded by doctors because I was in a resus bay, and my blood pressure was incredibly low, and they couldn't get it up. So they ended up they gave me several shots of adrenaline, And they eventually put me on an adrenaline infusion and took me up to ICU, where I spent a few days. So what they were doing for me in that moment, they were comforting me. I just knew that everything was under control. So my main worry was my dog if I died, and also that I'd promised my publisher that I wouldn't expire before launch day. I was thinking, oh no.
That's your priority. I love that.
I was like, I wasn't worried about dying or anything like that. I was just worried about Billy, and I was worried about my publisher.
Oh God, UQP would have just been like, "Holy shit!" with that when receiving that message. My goodness.
Well, I actually said that at my launch, and my publisher went, "Oh!" she was horrified. She was like, "Oh my goodness!" So,
oh bless! I love that. I just love that you highlight that space and highlight the people in that space, but. Not only that, when you what I also particularly love about the honesty of this book is that you delve very deeply into the experiences and the emotions of being hit with, okay, here's the next medical complication, and here's the next medical complication, and here's the next issue that you have to deal with. And you go through many stages of kind of processing it, dealing with it. And when your dad again asks you that question at the end and you're like, well, this is just how it is. It was astounding that with those physical challenges that you faced yourself, that you just kind of found a way to process it and keep going. But there was one part that really grabbed me in this book, and this was your examination of grief, which I found very... in contrast, because you were talking about, you're dealing with all of these issues, like it was this disease this week and this particular issue this week, but then the thoughts of losing someone, and then the days of them not being there were particularly poignant. I mean, there are a lot of stories here about you lost the ones that I first jump out to me is Michelle, and then your grandmother dying on consecutive days, and then Sean, your oldest CF mate. And then, of course, we alluded to it a little earlier, but the story of your donor, you were trying to send letters to the family just to say thank you. Yes. And then there's obviously the latest part in the book where you visit her, visit her grave.
Yeah.
Is grief the hardest part?
I think it is, because there's no manual for anything, but I think grief, it doesn't, like I think I say in the book, that time doesn't dilute it. I think if anything, with each passing year, and I've spoken to parents who have lost kids with CF, and it wasn't the first anniversary that was the hardest, it wasn't the second, it was the seventh, which is almost unexpected. You think that time heals, but I think that time numbs. It does numb your grief, but it never goes away, ever.
It's someone has a great quote, which is, it's not the day that the person you love dies, it's all the days afterwards, because they're not a place there. It's funny, doing this job and getting to interview authors, you chat with all sorts of people, and I was very lucky. I had the privilege to chat with Johnny Ruffo about his book.
Beautiful boy.
Yeah, and this was before his passing, about No Finish Line. And I asked about the feeling of him knowing that you're going to die, and how do you approach that? Particularly if you're surrounded by people, you're not the person experiencing it. And he gave me the best piece of advice ever, which is, you don't need to tell someone that, I hope you're okay, or you understand, because most likely you probably don't. And honestly, it's making it, and that's about making you feel better, not the person who is ill. What the best thing that you could possibly do is just be present with them. And the way that he described it is, ride the wave with me for a while. Just be there with me. We don't need to talk about the illness. We don't need to talk about anything. It's just ride the wave with me for a while. And I think this kind of came through in your book all the time, with the value of those people that you connected with, and the value of the relationships that you formed. And it was there was a remarkable feeling of presence to you
Yeah.
because it had to be, because every moment matters.
That's right. That's right. And I think with my CF friends, I think I've lost nearly 70.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm one of the only ones left alive in my cohort, with the people I grew up with. So that can be quite confronting, and that also leads to a lot of survivor's guilt. But Johnny was completely right. It really is. It's ride the wave with me. Just be present. And I think that's why I became a hospital chaplain, an agnostic hospital chaplain, because I never really had people just be present with me. And I think, back in the 90s, there was no such thing as an agnostic hospital chaplain. They were either nuns or Catholic priests. And I used to think that is the last person I would want sitting with me while I'm dying. So, and that was one of my reasons for going into chaplaincy. So I basically looked after all the heathens, and they loved that. The people with no assigned religion, I would say, I look after all the heathens, and they would lose their shit. They thought it was absolutely hilarious. So, and it's that gift of presence. And I didn't do a lot of talking. You don't do a lot of talking as a hospital chaplain. You're there to listen.
So many nurses, I mean, my auntie's a nurse, for example, and she often says, often it can be just about that when you are dealing with someone who is dying. It's a privilege to watch someone die, as it is a privilege to watch someone be born.
That's right.
And it's not about you, so don't make it about you. Be there, be present with them. And you touch on a great point, which was another point that I pulled about from this book. So many people may be listening to this podcast and thinking that this book may seem like a downer, but it's fucking hilarious. I just want to point out, like,
I think it's funny.
I think it's hilarious. I love how you highlight that in this setting, humor gets you through everything. I love the stories about you reading the pamphlets of people leading full lives with poo bags, and you were like, well, fuck.
Oh yeah.
And then also I think, what was it? Was it a stomach stoma? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
And you decided to call it Rosebud.
I did. I did, like the Orson Welles. Citizen Kane. So I'd be like, Rosebud, in various intonations of anger when it let me down, which was most days. But yeah, I do remember reading about people with stomas who do lead fulfilling lives, and I was like, well, fuck, that's not me. This bag explodes on the daily, sometimes twice a day, and it was one of the hardest things I think I've ever had to do. That 3 months with a bag of poop swinging off my stomach, that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And my greatest fear was that the reversal surgery wouldn't be successful, and I'd end up with a permanent colostomy, because I really don't think I could have gotten through that.
Yeah. Tell me about the value of humor in this situation. Tell me about it, because it just feels like this gets you through everything.
It really does. I think humor is both underrated and essential. I mean, I don't think I would be alive if I couldn't laugh at just about everything that's happened to me. I mean, if I can make a joke out of vulval cancer, then I can make a joke about pretty much anything. My family and friends and I laugh a lot, and I think that's always been our default position. So yeah, like my parents and my sister both have great senses of humour. So yeah, that was yeah, I think that was our default position.
It's a good default position to have when you're in those circumstances, and often just seeing how it pulled you through the bullshit
It really
was
did.
just, it pulls you through the bullshit, and it's a flat out acknowledgement and a kind of a fuck you to the circumstances you find yourself in, which is a big help in getting you through that situation in the first place. Out of curiosity, like, I mean, we already had mentioned that writing this book was hard. It was tough work. It was far from cathartic. It was a pain in the ass to transcribe it. But I always find with a lot of authors that such things can be very educational, the experience, even if it is just a bullshit ride. What did writing the book, transcribing it onto a page, what did it teach you?
I think because I've always been called, things like brave or inspiring. I don't feel like I'm a particularly brave person or a strong person, but I think it solidified to me that I am very, very resilient, and being able to laugh at, if you're when I was in a terrible station in life, I think, yeah, actually getting it down on the page, what did I learn about myself? I really think it gets down to resilience. And also, there would be days where I'd be writing at a cafe, and my mum would come and meet me for a coffee, and she'd say, "So what did you write about today?" I said, "That time when I dropped dead at a friend's funeral." And she went, "Oh yes, that was a lot." Because she was there and kind of had to resuscitate me. And we would just go, this is so perverse, like that we're talking about this and that it actually happened, because I think sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. I mean, if you did read my book as fiction, you wouldn't believe it, I don't think.
Yeah, it would just, yeah, God, trying to put it through a fiction lens, I would be like, how the hell? It would be too much.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit. I do want to. I wish I could keep diving into this book, but I also want to talk a little bit about, the fact we already alluded to the fact that you didn't want to die before the book came out, much to UQP's lamenting. But I'm so glad that UQP actually just took a chance on this book and took a chance on this story. And now we have this story forever. It's out there in the world, and it's amazing.
I'm immortal. I feel kind of immortal now that I've got a book out there.
You are immortal, because this book will be doing the rounds, and it's going to go off and have a life of its own. And
yeah, that's right. It's not mine. It's not mine anymore. It's everyone else's. And there was a hell of a lot to cover, but it's not a particularly long book. I didn't want it to be, any longer than it had to be. I wanted it to have, prose that was economical, and I didn't want the book to lag anywhere. I don't feel that it does. I think I've had some people say to me who aren't readers, who have started it and they can't stop reading, and they've read the whole thing in the one sitting. So that to me is such a compliment.
Yeah, that's the best compliment you can get.
It really is, yes.
It's the best compliment you can get. Out of curiosity, because with books like this is intensely personal. This book it's you. I mean, it's obviously going off and doing its own thing, but it's your life, it's your experience. I'm just so curious about the process that it took to make it, because of the fact that this is so much more. It's so intensely personal, and there's so much intricate detail in there. What was it like, kind of kicking that around with UQP and going like, well, this story needs to be here, and this needs to be here, and this needs to be here, and all of it? What was it? A strange experience, because this book is you and your life.
Yeah, you want me to tell you about the story of my journey to publication? I'll make it really short. I'm doing some postgrad study at the University of Queensland, and my supervisor, Tom, told me to apply for the UQP writing mentorship. And I said, oh, really? You think? He went, absolutely. So I did, and I won that at the end of 2022. And I think by March, UQP had offered me a publishing contract. So March, and then the book was printed in November. So that was a pretty tight turnaround. But the editing process, I don't know whether I'm a masochist, but I loved the editing process. It was a true gift. It was seamless. It was enriching. I had the most incredible editors. So the process was really, it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced.
I'm not surprised to hear that. Editing is the best. Writing the first draft is a nightmare. From
Yes.
that point on, it's bliss, because you can just take this splodge and then just mold it into something glorious and glamorous, and people
Yeah.
much smarter and cleverer than us take it and make it make it twist and turn together.
Absolutely. And it was so fascinating to see it changing shape before my very eyes. And by the time the last round of proofs and editing came back, I was over the moon, thrilled with how it was reading. And editors are really the unsung heroes of publishing, I feel.
Oh yeah. They're your first reader. They're your first advocate. It's
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and they are the ones that give you the cold hard truths and know how to deliver it to you. So
and the more brutal, the better. I love being critiqued. So the more brutal the feedback, the better for me. That's how I respond. Otherwise you don't learn.
Absolutely.
You don't learn. Yeah.
What's next for you? I know that, I mean, as mentioned, you're doing this you're at UQ at the moment.
Yeah.
You're doing the chaplaincy stuff, and I know that you're kind of very passionate about being an advocate for organ donation, and also just for more honest conversations around dying and death. I feel like there's more to it than I feel like there's something else in there.
Well, maybe. I actually don't know. Unfortunately, when the pandemic started, I can never go back to hospital chaplaincy, because a hospital is the worst place for me to be, with getting viruses and what have you. So that actually broke my heart, not just a little, but a lot, because I'd found my purpose and then I couldn't do it. So at the moment, I'm doing my Master of Philosophy and Creative Writing, and I'm actually working on a book of non-fiction essays that are about 20,000 times more explicit than breath, and my dad is never allowed to read them.
Oh, no.
Ever. And so I need to finish that. I feel like, when I had my launch, there was about 170 people there. It was just, there were doctors there who had saved my life, teachers that I've known for 40 years that taught me at the Royal Children's Hospital School, all of my nearest and dearest who have been with me through the whole ride. And it was just so full of love. It was the feeling of love and joy was palpable. And I'm sort of like, you only get to publish and launch your first book once. So, I don't really know what's next. I do need to finish my degree, though.
Yeah, degreeing. Oof. Well, whatever you choose to do, I'm so glad that we have breath. And I'm so glad that And whatever you do next, whether it is another collection of stories, if you're inspired to pick up the pen again and write, I will be so excited to see what you have. But thank you for this book. It's beautiful. I love this book.
That means the world to me, Nick. So thank you.
We finished this podcast with a rapid fire question part of the day. So I hit you with a whole bunch of questions, and you give me the first answer that comes to your head. I know, terrifying.
Yeah.
So a couple I have given you a little bit of prep for, and we will dive straight in with ones about books, because you do like to read. You'd like to sit on the couch with Billy and have a read.
I do, yeah.
What is your favourite book that you've read in the last 12 months?
The last 12 months. Listen, I only read it in January, but
counts.
And I think it's a big call, but I think it's going to be my favourite book of the year. It's by John Boyne, and it's called Water, and it's part of a quartet of novellas. So Water, I think, the next one is called Earth. And it's a series of interlinked novellas, and how he writes the female voice is astounding, absolutely astounding. So I'm impatiently waiting for the next book to arrive in my letterbox.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing. John Boyne is really good. He's a really good author.
He is. He's prolific, absolutely prolific.
Yeah. What is your favorite debut novel that you've ever read? And we're talking like in your entire life.
Okay, that's a big call as well. There's been so many amazing debuts. I think my favorite debut was Amy Espeth's Sufficient Grace. That was published in 2012. And for such brutal subject matter, the writing was so subtle and nuanced, and I don't think it got the attention it deserves. So if you haven't read it, I encourage you to seek it out. It's just beautiful.
Oh, amazing. Any chance to add to my ridiculously massive TBR pile? I'll try and take advantage of it.
I hear you, boyfriend.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite word?
It's probably, I do love the C word. There's a lot of C word in breath.
Drop it. It's true. It's the great word. It's such a good word to say. Defecation. Yeah, defecation flows trippingly from the tongue.
Yes,
it's true.
Yeah.
Everyone, small word of warning. I mean, I will be putting a warning into this podcast anyway. If you bad words are something that you're not okay with, but there's a lot of swearing in this book.
There's a lot of swearing in that book, and what I loved about UQP is they didn't try to censor me in any way, shape, or form. They were just like, "This is you. We love it," and they rolled with it.
I love it, and great choice of word. Finally, someone uses a swear word as their favorite word. I vibe. Like,
oh dear.
If you could pick any genre. So you're sitting with Billy on your lap, you're chilling out, you're in your happy place. Yes. If you could pick any genre as your go-to, what would it be?
Literary fiction. Yeah, lit fic. So I'm not proud of this, but I'm quite a reading snob.
Ooh, okay.
Yes, I am. And I think literary fiction just takes me to where I want or need to go. Yeah. But, soft spot for memoir as well, of course.
Yeah. Love that. What does dying feel like?
It was very painful. I remember being in a lot of pain. And in 1998, doctors weren't great with giving out the pain relief required for, when you were either in pain from surgery or in pain from dying. So I was sort of being given measly doses of morphine. I was still very lucid. I knew the day before I got called up for transplant, I knew that I was on my way out and I was going to dip into the typical CF coma. That happens. And yeah, it was really bloody painful. It wasn't scary. It wasn't scary at all. I wasn't scared. I was very much at peace with it. And I think that's because I was just so fucking tired. 21 years of kind of fighting against it and railing against this illness. I was really tired.
That's so interesting, though, that you weren't. So many people are. I mean, that part about the TED talk and the guy just not getting it, and maybe he's terrified of death, and you mentioned it's because he had kids and all of that other stuff. But so interesting that at the moment you were not scared.
No, I don't think I've ever been scared of dying. I've been scared of living, which is interesting. I think after my cancer surgery, I was afraid. I was afraid to live. And I think after my transplant, I was a bit like that as well. Things were tenuous for quite a while. I had a really long recovery. It was complicated. It was painful. And yeah, I think, yeah, that's where I was at. So afraid of living. Like, who was afraid of living? Well, I was.
So interesting. When shit hits the fan, and I know that it does. When shit literally hits the fan, metaphorically and literally, do you have a particular book or a music album or a film that you turn to be like, this gets me. This is what I need now.
Nick Cave, every time.
Oh yes,
Nicky Cave. I know.
He's so good. He's so good. And you know what? Strangely, I think underappreciated. Even though, like, I think a lot of people get him, but like, considering how good him and the Bad Seeds are, like, they should have. I reckon they'll be appreciated more when they're gone.
I think so too. And I remember one of the albums that actually got me through the year of transplant was The Boatman's Call. And I know every word to every song on that album. So yeah, my go-to is Nick Cave. A book, I don't know if I have a book. Because I guess it depends on, where I am. I remember when I was heading to emergency, when I had COVID, the most important thing for me was throwing in a few books. And I got a tiny bit of reading done in ICU, but not a lot. It's not really conducive to quiet time or reading. But that was it's so messed up that was one of my priorities before going to emergency. But that's how I've always been. The first thing I always pack for hospital are books. Yeah.
I love it. What's the meaning of life to you?
That's a large question. I think the meaning of life is to have purpose. I think that, on my deathbed, I'm going to look back at my life and think about the love I gave and the love I received. I think love is what it comes down to. And as I alluded to before, the other thing is purpose. I don't think you can find meaning in life unless you have a purpose that's bigger than yourself. And for me, that was becoming a chaplain.
And then last question, are you happy?
Oh, so happy. Yeah, the happiest I've ever been, actually. The last few years have been the best of my life. I'm 47 and I have loved my 40s. It's been the best decade of my life by far. Even though as you get older, things, your body tends to fall apart a little bit. And, that's what happens also with, still having cystic fibrosis. I've just got these kick-ass lungs that won't give up. But yeah, I've never been happier. I'm in such a place of peace within myself, and just being at home with my dog, with, being surrounded by books and listening to music. And it really is the simple things for me that I think, get me through.
CJ is happy. CJ is
Yes.
okay.
CJ is thrilled.
That's all I need to know. I could honestly chat to you. I can honestly chat to you all day, but unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, CJ.
Thank
and
you.
For everyone who hasn't, get a copy of Breath. It's a book you absolutely must read.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Date with a Debut, and for listening to the Words and Nerds channel. You can buy all books mentioned in today's episode down in the description box, and if you enjoyed the show, or indeed any episode of Words and Nerds, drop us a review, leave us 5 stars or a thumbs up. It is hugely appreciated. Catch you soon!